Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? Thanks everyone for joining the webinar. Today we're going to be talking about staying compliant, how to find and fix metric issues. And we've got excellent panel put together for today to talk about some of the things that are happening in the industry. Just a quick rundown of what we're going to be talking about today. First, we'll introduce our panel and talk a little bit about Aperture, and then we're going to jump into our discussion. So we'll talk a little bit about common compliance issues and what causes those, and how to identify and fix them, and then also how to prevent those from going forward. So we'll also be demonstrating our product Aperture and how it helps to find and fix compliance issues and keep you compliant. And then we'll have some opportunity at the end for any questions that you have for our panelists. And we've got a wealth of experience here on the webinar today. So we'll start with introductions. My name's Eldon Brown. I'm the CEO of Aperture, and I'll talk a little bit more about Aperture once we get going. But I will let our panel introduce themselves. So Cass, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Cass Coleman. I've been in the cannabis industry for almost 10 years now, dealing with many different software platforms and METRC. I generally run the quality compliance regulatory groups at the companies that I'm at. So that's me. I've been doing this quality compliance for about 20 years now. The first half of my career was in pharmaceuticals.
Great. Thanks. And Colin.
Thanks, Eldon. Hi, everyone. My name is Colin Mudd. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Canope Consulting. I have a responsible vendor training program that's approved in Colorado and Illinois, and I have been in the cannabis industry here in Colorado since 2009. Really been focused on the compliance side of things for the past 8, almost 9 years. And then before that, I was lucky enough to be able to start dispensaries and run dispensaries, all the way back before Colorado even had regulations. So I've got a pretty unique set of a pretty unique experience with METRC over the years. They were the first ones. Colorado was one of the first states to utilize METRC. So really excited to be able to see Aperture and help on the webinar today. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks, Colin. And last but not least, also from Aperture, we have Ian Galando. Ian.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ian Galando, Customer Success Manager here at Aperture. Been working in the cannabis industry for about 3 years, but I have about 12 years of enterprise software experience, and I will be taking you all through the demo of Aperture later in this webinar. Thanks.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. I want to just talk for a second about what Aperture is to kind of frame up what we're going to be talking about. Aperture is a software platform that for data analytics and reporting. So what we do is integrate with multiple systems that operators already have, and we pull that data together into one consolidated reporting platform. So we offer reports and dashboards that are focused on key metrics and KPI across the different areas, including obviously compliance. That's what we're going to be talking about today, but also testing and wholesale and retail and some financial numbers. And we know what a struggle it is for people to bring that data together and actually make sense of it and be able to report out on it. So we look at these different areas as kind of the key pillars in the business, and we know that having that data accessible and reportable is really important for any operator, especially those that don't have that kind of expertise on staff. So we really focused from a product standpoint on making it easy to use and onboard, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the webinar. I want to start. This was something that we had put together. Michigan is kind of a home for Aperture, and we were looking at from a compliance standpoint and the actions, disciplinary actions taken with licensees recently. And this visual, I think, really illustrates what's happening not just in Michigan, but a lot of other places. Is we're seeing a big increase in the actions that states are taking to ensure compliance. Obviously, we all know there's a problem with gray and black market product coming in and being introduced into the legal market. And so naturally, when states are cracking down or going after compliance issues for illegal operations, they're also then looking more closely at licensed operations. And so this is a pretty dramatic shift in the enforcement action in Michigan. And I mean, we're seeing, similar efforts in a lot of other places as well, where there are compliance related issues that maybe in the past hadn't been enforced stringently, but are now under new scrutiny. So it's more important now than ever to make sure that you are get into compliance and stay into compliance across the board. And obviously, compliance touches a lot of different areas: physical security and transportation and all sorts of things. We're going to be focused on METRC compliance today and talking about how to keep the data that's reported to the state in line and accurate on an ongoing basis. We could have a whole day seminar talking about compliance in every area of the business. So with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to the panel. We've got some topics for conversations that I'll throw out, kind of just asking some questions. I think one of the things we'd like to do for the people who are in the audience today is using the Q&A on Zoom. If you click on the Q&A, we'd love to get feedback on if there are specific areas of METRC compliance that you're struggling with now, or that are an issue for you that you'd like to our panelists to talk about. You can put those questions in the Zoom Q&A at any point, and all of our panelists can see that. And we are going to have some Q&A time specifically at the end. But just to kick things off, if you've got compliance related issues that are struggling with, or your biggest challenge in compliance, we'd love to hear that. So we'll be watching for that to come in. So I'll open the panel discussion with the question. I talked a little bit about some of the things we're seeing in Michigan. I'll open that up, Casson and Colin, to what trends are you seeing, or what things are you seeing in the compliance space, as we wrap up this year going into next year? What changes or what differences are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, the big changes I'm seeing in Michigan are specific to enforcement, mostly related to labeling and inventory transparency. Maybe 2 years ago, your daily activities might not have had to be as accurate as the agency wants them to be today. I've kind of seen that as a pattern across multiple states now with METRC, where all of a sudden people start saying, hey, we need more enforcement. We need more enforcement. And they're like, okay, well, the easiest thing for us to enforce is to come into your facility and weigh your stuff or count your things. Oh, and your numbers are off. Okay, now you've got an inventory control issue, which then goes to a security issue, which then becomes a labeling issue, right? So, those are the kinds of things I'm seeing. We've seen some enforcement action on those subjects in the last couple of months. What about you, Colin?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I'm seeing, now that COVID restrictions are not there anymore, particularly here in Colorado. I know that in 2020, the Marijuana Enforcement Division brought in $1.5 million in fines. But then in 2021, they only brought in $500,000 in fines. And I'm seeing as the year closes out that there's been a rebound, and the inspectors have gotten out into licensed facilities a lot more this year than they had in 2021, or even in 2020. The fact that they still brought in that amount of fines is pretty surprising. And I think around the country, what we're seeing is just obviously the maturity of each market, and with that comes a better, a more educated enforcement arm. And so inspectors have been in facilities now for 1 to 5 years, and there's less of a chance of essentially getting away with something now. And what's unique where METRC is used is that that is a tool for the enforcement agency to use against you, whereas other industries are not, as we don't have like a state inventory tracking system for pharmaceutical companies, or for like dietary supplements. And so I think around the country what we've seen is a more educated enforcement, and I think the trend that I'm seeing is essentially more recalls too. And that's another function of METRC that the state regulatory agency can use in their favor. And particularly here in Colorado, public recalls that have a ton of negative impact when it comes to branding. But at the end of the day, it's about protecting public health and safety, and across the board, no matter what state you're in, that's the goal of the enforcement agency, is to protect public health and safety.
Yeah, those are great points. I think, the other thing too, when it comes to auditing, and this is not unique to the cannabis industry, but, if a regulator is doing an audit or is looking at the data in the compliance system, once they find one problem or find something that shows that maybe you have processes that are not very tight, or, you're breaking some of the rules either intentionally or unintentionally in one area, that just means they will put more scrutiny on all of the other areas of compliance. And so sometimes kind of, these small things can lead to auditors digging deeper and finding, additional issues. And, even when people believe that they're reporting accurately and trying to follow the law, they're, eventually, potentially are finding those issues and taking enforcement action. So, I think that makes it even more important to pay attention to the little things in addition to the big things.
I think it's not quite that time yet, Eldon, but next year is coming, which means next year's annual financial statements, which means next year's taxes. And I don't know if it, how things are in Colorado, because I never had to look at the tax side there with any of the companies I was in. But here, man, like if you don't already have a plan for your accountant, and you haven't actually already looked and trued up your accounting system against METRC, you better be on that, because you got to submit those here in a couple of months, and it takes a long time to get those trued up. So
yeah, you're right, Cass. And METRC is used to calculate the excise tax that's associated not only with the state here in Colorado, the state excise tax, but then local municipalities have also enacted their own excise tax. And those reports from METRC are what you're held accountable to. And Eldon had mentioned too, I mean, when you don't ever want to be in a position where an inspection turns into an investigation. And I think with METRC, unfortunately, it's just the nature of the beast that we have something that within states that use METRC, we have a state inventory tracking system that doesn't stop you from doing anything illegal, or doesn't stop you from doing anything incorrectly. It just documents it and helps that regulatory agency enforce those rules. And so you have an extra burden that's in place wherever METRC is used.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think that kind of ties into the next topic really well, which is, I mean, in your experience, what areas of that compliance do you see operators struggling with the most? What are some of those common things where people are either not reporting accurately unintentionally or not catching errors, which are bound to happen? It's human error. Humans are putting the data in, which means there will be error. What are some of the common areas that operators should be looking out for, and that typically will get hung up on?
Yeah, I think Cass can probably elaborate this on a little bit more too in her experience. But I think over the years, what we've seen is a lack of oversight within METRC and individual companies. Like I'm assuming that the majority of companies where METRC is operational, they have a particular person that's responsible for taking care of the data entry within METRC, and whether or not it's cultivation or manufacturing or retail, like you said, there's human error. And even though you may upload sales, or you may create a harvest batch or a production batch, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've done it correctly. And those errors that are not caught early continue to be made over and over again, and over time become even worse than it just being like a one-off issue. But yeah, I mean, I think more than anything, it's just human error. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't have the intent to comply, but there are specific guidelines wherever METRC is operational that specifically state that you cannot omit information, and you cannot doctor the information or change the information in a way that benefits you as the licensee. So when you put in that information, it has to be accurate and it has to be consistent. And what we've seen in Colorado in particular, just because we were one of the first states to use METRC, is that the Marijuana Enforcement Division has aggregated data over the years to be able to identify and red flag abnormalities. And if you have all of a sudden a brand new person that comes in that's responsible for utilizing METRC and putting in that data, and you have a drastic change and you don't have any information to back that up, that's where a back end investigate or inspection where an analyst is looking at that data will turn into an investigation. Well, now they're going to show up at your door and they're going to be asking questions as to why these particular numbers aren't matching up, and you have to be able to defend your position. It doesn't stop you, unfortunately, like I said, from doing anything incorrectly.
So true. I think one of the first things I experienced with Ian, and I sometimes I feel strange about sharing the story, is that I had two really great inventory specialists. I had trained both of them. I thought the training was good, right? They passed their quizzes, right? They'd gone to their METRC training. They were good to go. It wasn't until I started working with Ian and I got a report out of Aperture that said we only had 5 harvests total for the entire time our facility had been open. And at that point, we had several hundred, that I realized that these people who are senior members of our team had not been completing harvests the entire time, which the rules say you were supposed to complete your harvest, right? So I mean that then became a huge data entry hurdle. So that's certainly where sometimes people are doing. I mean, it wasn't that they weren't doing it, right? The plants were harvested, packages were created, but just not taking it all the way through to the end. I see quite a bit. I also see things where it just comes out that the naming of things is totally wrong, where someone will say a harvest, oh, I picked this strain, and then all of a sudden that's not something you can change. Okay, right? So now that information is there forever, and it causes confusion, because is it what the name is, the item name, or is it what you tag the harvest strain name as, right? Because that information is right next to each other the whole time, and well, now we don't know, right? Because which one's right? So now you're trying to remember which plants did you cut those clones off of, for instance. So I see a lot of that. I also see a lot of software issues where one piece of software will throw an error, For instance, you're not just using METRC, but you're using another tool that's going to put information into METRC. So just mostly data validation issues that have to be resolved, where a sale will be entered more than once, or a harvest weight won't make it from where you took the weight information with the scale into METRC, right? So a lot of those kinds of quirky database communications issues I see occur, as well as I think just kind of from a broader instance of because I run a lot of retail facilities. So, you purchase things from someone else and their process is completely different than everyone else's. So, maybe the label is different, or, they do all of their bags are in grams and all of your bags are in pounds, and the other guy's bags are all in half pounds. And yep. So I mean, there's so many ways that everything can get kind of fuddled, because there's so many different, while we have one system that we're all using it slightly different, because the rules don't tell us how we have to use the system, just that we must, right? So
right. Okay. Well, I think we've talked a little bit, I think also about, kind of what's the root cause of, some of these compliance issues. Something that comes to mind for me that I don't think we've talked about is, it's having the checks and balances, right? And it's having another set of eyes looking at that data, so that because it's not a matter of if there's bad data or if there's been some kind of human error along the way or a number getting transposed. It's not a matter of if, it's where is it and how do we spot it. And I think we all can suffer from the same problem, that if you only have one person, if you're that person and you're staring at it every day and you're doing it every day, it's very easy to sort of become blind to the issues, because it feels like everything is right. And so having a process in place where there is a check and balance, and if you have systems integrating with METRC, that you also have a process for reconciling that data and looking at it, not through that same system, in order to ensure that what one system is telling you is what actually matches what's in METRC. We also see, people will change, software over time that integrates and pushes different data. So every time you bring new software in or you change software, that's another big opportunity for things to get missed. And again, those systems may report accurately, but you don't realize there are remnants of other data, still lingering in METRC specifically. Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to add too that, I think the industry is obviously moving toward good manufacturing practices, good agricultural practices, good documentation practices. And part of those processes and procedures are having a double check. And, that has to do with like a physical process that's being done within the facility. So you have 1 or 2 or 3 people that are confirming that whatever's been done is been done correctly. But we have this additional, as I said earlier, this additional burden where we've got this state inventory tracking system, and we should also try, I think, from a compliance standpoint, but also, like a sustainability and longevity standpoint, you want to make sure that all of the data that's being tracked over time is correct, and it's indicative of what you're trying to do as a company. Like I said before, I mean, I think intent to comply is huge. Nobody means to make a mistake, but ultimately, if you're using another bit of software that doesn't, that touts you don't need to ever enter anything into METRC, or, it eliminates double entry, those API connections, and I'm certainly not a tech person, but those API connections with METRC are not always perfect, especially when it goes from state to state. And so having a double check, not only on, physical processes and procedures, but also a double check or a triple check on your data is extremely important as we move forward to, fingers crossed, one day we'll have federal legalization and we'll be a quote unquote normal business or a normal industry. But this is unfortunately something that, could be there and you don't know it. So, an ounce of prevention is worth an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And making sure that you have your data right is probably just important, if not more, because it sticks with you forever, right?
For sure.
Absolutely. So knowing that these problems are out there, and knowing that anybody who's been operating for a period of time is certainly has those types of problems lurking in their data, and we know that METRC itself can make it challenging. We'll say challenging to find those things. But what would you recommend to an operator that wants to find those issues and get up to speed? Where do they start? How do you start in fixing past mistakes and moving forward and preventing them? What are your recommendations for somebody who's just kind of getting started trying to figure out what to do?
Well, you need an Ian, and he's gonna show you a tool that makes you completely rethink how you work with METRC, and retrain your team, because he has visualization of the data. Now, whichever tool you choose to use, for me, I had been looking for a solution that would give me an at a glance, are things okay? I have over 100 employees. I have 17 licenses, constantly opening new locations. That's a lot of different METRC instances, all communicating with each other across 3 different inventory systems, because, cultivation, processing, and retail do not use the same inventory system to communicate with METRC, and about 15 giant spreadsheets, right? Like that's, what we all do, unless we have another solution to help us take the data and visualize it. So once I had that, like, I think, I would never give it up. How about that? So I would recommend that you get access to the METRC database, visualization if you can, Tableau, etc., because the reporting features that are built into METRC are really great for like the late 90s, and we're not in the late 90s right now. That doesn't mean that they aren't functional, because they are, but they're, we can do so much more now, and we want to do so much more with big data than we did in the past. So that's what I would do. If someone said, hey, what should I do? I would say, hey, you need a software that's going to sift through everything on your behalf, okay, and help you visualize the data with, simply. For me, some of the visualization is as simple as I said. I work with Ian, and he's like, I think your database is broken, and it's what I said to him, and he was like, what? No, my team had been literally doing something wrong for almost 2 years, right? So something as simple as that, getting, hey, were all of the plants harvested? Yes or no? Okay. Okay, now I have all of how much material did I harvest? How much material did I dry back? How many packages did I create? And is that total amount, are those equivalent? Right? I mean, really simple, basic things, which quite honestly is 4 spreadsheets worth of information that you have to report out of METRC and then combine into its own spreadsheet to do those verifications if you don't have a tool. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things that I do now for compliance, and that, everywhere I go, I say, hey guys, you should be looking at this, because if I've made this mistake, I like to think of myself as a really diligent, quality like director, okay, then other people can too, right? My finance director, all about, hey, I have to sync up, our, we use Sage, have to sync up Intact and all of the invoices with the sales tool, right? With METRC every month, right? To submit that in the quarterly report. That's in Michigan. I don't know if you guys have that in other states, Colin, but I mean, these are things that you have to do. And I'll tell you, after having sifted through hundreds and hundreds of sales transactions, having a tool that just tells me that I have 4 that aren't right, and these are the numbers, go look at them. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no, you're absolutely right. And it makes it simple. Like it's hard enough when you start out and there's enough things to learn that you don't want to bury this and not put emphasis on making sure that you're getting started on the right foot. And I think my advice for anybody that's just starting out is really take some time to figure out whether or not you're ready for an over-regulated industry. And it's strange to say because we don't even have federal legalization, but at this point in Colorado, when I started back in 2009, you needed a sales tax license and a landlord or own a building to allow you to sell medical cannabis to patients. And at this point now we have 500 pages of rules, and it's still growing. And every year it changes. And so I think if you can start out simplifying processes and procedures, but also putting critical control points in place to stop a systemic issue from getting bigger, it's important. I mean, it's hard enough when you're a new business and you're taking the webinar training from METRC and you're trying to figure out, if you're a retail location, your point of sale, and making sure that your SOPs are in place from a manufacturing and cultivation standpoint. Then you add in testing. We have an insane amount of testing in this industry, regardless of where you are now in the country. There's a ton that you're responsible for at the beginning. And so what I really liked about Aperture is the fact that it simplifies things for people, and it allows you to take a look at the data that's already there within your state inventory tracking system and make sense of it more than anything else. Like I was the compliance director for Incredibles for 8 years, and we had a ton of information. There'd be 100 to 150 manifests that went out every single day. And Cass mentioned 100 employees. There's so much data. There's production batches that are 4,000 to 8,000 chocolate bars, or 4,000 to 8,000 gummies. And there's, after a certain point, like all of that just gets lost in the wash, and you don't have, unfortunately, you don't have as good of reporting as you could have within METRC. And if you are savvy enough to be able to take CSV files from METRC and put together your own aggregation of that data and then interpret that data, then more power to you if you have that ability. But a lot of people don't, because they're just trying to figure out and navigate those compliance waters at the beginning, and they're afraid of making a mistake because you have no slack with the regulatory agency, and you're trying to build credibility. And part of that is understanding what day-to-day operations are producing from a data standpoint. And nowadays, data is king, and you can't just stick your head in the sand and think that, okay, cool, I've trained these people to be able to do the right thing, and hopefully they do the right thing. But meanwhile, I've got to go make sure that, the plants are growing correctly, and we're passing testing, and we're finding clients, and we're dealing with 280E, and we're dealing with taxes within the state and local jurisdictions too. Like there's just so many levels to this. I help clients every day fix mistakes in METRC, say like on a weekly basis. It's not too bad here in Colorado, but I have clients in other states that are scared to death of using this, even though they've gone through the training with METRC, they've gone through new business training, cultivation training, testing training, whatever. And it's very difficult to be able to tackle all of those responsibilities and do it efficiently. And then, oh, by the way, like we could have, the rules change now in the next 6 to 8 months, or 6 months to a year, and you've got to get on top of how to be compliant with those changes. And if you can simplify any task, it's worth its weight in gold. And so what I, have seen from Aperture is being able to simplify that data, be able to disseminate to everybody within the company who needs to see it, and then you're able to make good decisions and forecast for the next 6 months to a year or whatever, because that's really all we can do in this industry. We can't think more than 6 months or a year in advance. And so it's really important to be able to focus on compliance and take responsibility for what you can, so that you can weather whatever storm comes your way. And as we're seeing in Colorado, recalls in particular could be catastrophic to license holders. And without having that information to deal with that, you could be left in a situation where you simply can't operate anymore. And I think everybody wants to build a strong foundation to be able to be prepared for federal legalization, however that looks. And I think, compliance is that backbone that you have to make sure is strong. Otherwise, in my opinion, obviously I deal with clients that really focus on compliance, but in my opinion, if you're not focusing on that, and if you're not taking a look at the data that's available to you and being proactive, the reactive response in this industry is not sustainable.
Great points. Yeah, the one last thing I would add is, designing your compliance process to have built-in checks and balances, in the financial auditing and compliance, separation of duties, and, having so that you don't have one person who can control the entire process, and having, multiple checkpoints to make sure that everything looks good on both sides of a transaction. Those are all things that, are inherent, and people are trained, go to college and trained in those principles. And I think, just shamelessly stealing the best practices from, another regulatory or compliance process is a smart thing to do. I had a conversation just last week with an operator who had one compliance person that was, essentially modifying the data, and ended up, stealing several $100,000 worth of products. And one of the things that person did was manipulate the METRC data in order to, be able to hide what was going on and build up, sort of a stash of product that no one really knew existed. So that then once that was, built up, then they stole it all. So really terrible situation. And compliance alone and METRC alone is not going to be able to stop determined people from doing things they shouldn't do, but separating those responsibilities and making sure that you have checks and balances goes a long way to spotting inconsistencies very early and being able to figure out, what the cause of it is. So, well, thank you. We are going to have some Q&A in just a minute. So for everyone on the webinar, if you have any questions that you'd like to pose to our panel, feel free to enter those into the Q&A. We are going to do a brief demo of Aperture. So we're gonna focus on compliance. We're going to share some of the other great things that Aperture does, but Ian's going to do a demo for us around Aperture. Just a couple of key points in the way that we've designed the platform. One is, it's 100% automated, and it gives you a single pane of glass, all of the reporting that can be shared with your entire team. Having everyone working from the same numbers is important as well. We integrate with METRC and pull your entire history going all the way back to the first harvest, and the forecasting and the analytics that you see are based on historical. So we use things like machine learning to identify trends and call out outliers. So these are the same things that regulators do. when they're looking for inconsistencies. So we're using the similar concepts to help you spot things that are outliers in your environment. It really doesn't require any IT expertise. You don't have to have any servers or build anything. It's all online, just access through the web browser. And we do proactive monitoring. So as test results are coming in, as harvests are completed, when we find compliance-related data errors, those are actually proactively brought to your attention. And Ian will touch on how that happens. And then outside of compliance, we do a lot of reporting and analytics for cultivation and sales and retail and inventory management. So we'll show you just a little bit of those areas in the demo, but we're going to focus primarily on compliance. So I will turn it over to Ian, and Ian will walk us through what we do for compliance.
Great, thank you, Eldon. All right, you should be able to see my screen now. Thank you again. I'm going to walk you all through how Aperture keeps your licenses straight, helps keep you compliant by showing you different compliance violations, potential compliance violations, and areas that your cultivation processes might be leading you and exposing you to unnecessary risk. So I do want to take a quick moment and just talk about how Aperture works. Eldon explained it very briefly. And I just want to talk about how it is a very fast onboarding process. You sign up on our website. You only spend about 5 to 10 minutes for total onboarding. You create your account, you log in, you enter in your METRC key, and then we begin syncing your data. And it's that simple. About 2 to 3 hours, we sync all of your historical metric data, and then all of the reports that you're going to see, the boards that you're going to see, everything that you see happens automatically and are pre-populated for you. So a very quick and easy process. No additional input is needed from you or your team. So I want to start off by showing you those clear compliance violations that you do need to address. So first up, when it comes to compliance, is negative numbers. Negative numbers, just not a good thing in general when it comes to compliance, but you can't have negative plants, you can't have negative inventory quantities. And so here we can show you some clear examples of that, like inventory with negative quantity. This report shows you the exact tag numbers, what the product is, its location, and just how negative that package is and when it was packaged. So it gives you a clear idea as to what the issue is, where it occurred, when it occurred, so you can address and prevent it from happening again and avoid any costly fines or administrative holds that may be placed on those packages. So next up, let's talk about exceeding state limits. Now, every state has different laws, but I'm going to use Michigan as our example here. And in the state of Michigan, you can't have a plant batch greater than 100 plants. Even if you're cutting from the same mother plant, once you hit 100, you got to create a new plant batch. And so here we can see a list of all of our historical plant batches that exceeded 100 and the date that they were created. So I can use this to quickly see the active plant batches that are in violation of this rule, so I can address it and take care of those extra plants. And then I can also look at the issue again historically and understand, is this a recurring issue? Is this something I need to retrain? Like Cass mentioned, maybe this is something that you believed your team was doing correctly, and you can find that issue and you can address it, do that retraining to make sure everybody is on the same page so that you have one less red flag on your account when the state looking at its audit activities. Another way that you can be exceeding your state limits is by going over your plant counts based off of your licenses. And so here I can very quickly see all of the plants that are under each of the licenses that we've put into Aperture. Makes it easy just to make sure that you're staying on top of the total numbers that you have and you don't go over and again, get that attention that we don't want. So next I want to talk about potential compliance issues. And so we have a series of aging plant reports, old plant reports, as you can see here. And what we do is we look for potentially destroyed or lost plants that have not been updated appropriately in METRC. So for every strain that we have data on from your METRC data, we look at the historical data to see how long it's spent in each growth phase. So how long did it spend as an immature plant, as a vegetative plant, and a flowering plant? And for example, in this strain right here, Pi 95, we expect it to have been in the immature phase for about 21, 22 days. This report then looks for all of your active plant batches and says, which of these batches have plants that are 10 days older than the strain's average. And so we can see here that we have an extremely old plant batch. With that age, these plants were likely harvested, if not destroyed. And so I can see that this is almost assuredly an issue, right? This is an active plant batch that these 39 plants have either been harvested or destroyed, but they are certainly not immature plants. I would hate to have an auditor come in, going through the rooms and say, hey, can you show me those 39 Pi 95s in clone room? And be like, I don't actually have those. And so this is a great list for me to come through and clean up my metric. And again, address those process issues like Eldon was talking about that's leading to faulty and consistent data quality issues. You know, we have versions of this report also for vegetative plants and flowering plants, which are less likely to see those errors, but you want to know if those issues exist. Then we have our historic plant life cycle audit. Again, a potential issue with process where we can see where our process of entering the data might be causing us at risk. I can see a number of plants here by their tag where the planted date is prior to the tagged date. And what this means basically is that someone is late entering these plants. They are backdating them. And in some cases, they're backdating them by a significant degree here, right? I can see that they entered this on the 12th because that's the planted date. They said it was tagged on the 10th and it entered flower on the 20th. So from the moment this was entered into METRC for the first time, it then entered flower 8 days later, which is very late. And depending on your state, that might not be a direct compliance issue. But again, this is a symptom of an ongoing issue of data integrity and training that will just put you at risk because of other issues that will cause up from this carelessness. And then finally, as Colin mentioned, the states have a wealth of data about harvesting, and they know what looks suspicious and what doesn't. And so this report, the cured harvest yield estimated versus actual, it looks at all of your harvests and says, what was the expected performance based on your own performance? And then what did you actually get? And so I can quickly look at this and see, where did my harvest significantly overperform, which may raise an eyebrow from somebody at the state, you know, especially some of these larger plant counts where you had 84 plants and you performed over 50% better than expected. That might raise an eyebrow to some suspicious activity. Or also the alternative, right? I might look at the inverse of that and say, where did you have some suspiciously low amounts where maybe some product went out the back door? And that's not to say that there is suspicious activity going on here, but these are the things that the state is going to be looking at when they are looking for bad actors who are either moving product out into the black market or bringing black market product in and laundering it. And so you want to be aware of that to avoid, like Eldon had that story of the person who was skimming off the top. This is how you can identify those kinds of issues. And then finally, to stay on top of these issues before they appear in a report where you might not check it every day, we have our insights feed. And the insights feed will show you ongoing pieces of data that make up the reports, but the individual instances of them occurring. So you can see things like failed tests, which is not necessarily a direct compliance issue. You're being made aware of a failed test, but you can see things like that negative inventory. So the first time it appears in a report, you know, maybe you've been working through the negative inventory report. You want to make sure that you catch it as it happens. Well, here we have that notification and you can assign it to somebody so they can address it quickly. Now, I want to talk, while I got here, I want to talk about a few other reports that aren't necessarily specific to compliance, but they are using that exact same compliance data that we've been showing you. The first is our harvest report. If you've been growing, you build a harvest report, everybody puts one together, but we do it for you. We do it automatically, and we do it for every harvest that you've ever logged. So you have the exact same methodology for every harvest that you've ever logged. This was one of the ones that Cass and I discussed where all of their harvest data was, there was 5 harvests listed, and then it was very confusing. Well, we sorted that out. You can quickly see all of the key information about your harvest, like where was it grown, when did the harvest occur, you know, total yield, yield per plant. And then as those test results come in, if it gets tested, we pull them through as well. So it's very easy for you to do things like, you know, evaluate a strain. Is the strain worth growing? Well, I can look at every harvest that we've ever logged for that, including fresh frozen harvest, and see, is this a worthwhile strain for us to continue growing? Speaking of harvests, let's talk about, well, I want to know, I can't change what I'm growing currently, so I want to know what I can expect, you know, before it gets on that cured is estimated versus actual. And so here's our harvest forecast. So again, we are using all of your historical data for each individual strain to say, regardless of what phase it's in, here's how many plants are currently growing. Here's how long we expect it to take, based again on the averages for that strain, when it will be harvested, how long it'll take to cure, what that yield will be. We give you the estimates of flower versus shake trim. And then if you grow it for fresh frozen, what's that estimated value there? So an incredibly powerful tool for you to use on the processing side to know, should we be sending this to the packaging team to make pre-rolls or distillate, or selling it as bulk flour. It's a very powerful tool for forecasting and planning. Next up, we have our historical yield. So in addition to the into just what will we produce, I want to see things like, what is my yield per plant by strain? So here I can see historically, what is the average yield per plant in grams for every strain. And we had a customer, actually, a very interesting story about these reports here. Had a customer that was looking at this particular strain right here, Mandarin Confectionery. It was one of their most popular strains. They grow it a lot. You can see it's one of their top performers. 290 grams per plant, pretty good performer for them. And so they took that information, 290 grams per plant, and they went over to the other report here by flower location. Oh, I went to the fresh frozen one, apologies. And then they looked at the yield per plant by flower location, and they simply said, let's see where this strain performs best. And so they applied that filter. And now they can see not only every room that this strain has been grown in, but they can look at the yield per plant and say, wow, these first 3 rooms, I am getting up to or more than 10% more yield just by growing this strain in the room it responds best. I might have all these rooms set up exactly the same, but it is responding best in these 3 rooms. And so a simple operational change that involves a little bit of planning and then 5 minutes of checking and validating in Aperture, I can get 10% more yield. I mean, what could you do with even just like 3% more yield per harvest, right? By optimizing where you grow. And then finally, the last piece I want to show you here is our aging report. So managing inventory and tracking inventory is a pain for anybody that has more than 1 license. It's a pain in METRC with 1 license. And so our aging report takes all of your packages and it places them into a very simple aging format. So you can stay on track of what you are, what you have, and what you need to move. And so, I'm going to be looking at this 180 days plus example. For example, I'm going to be making sure that I stay on top of those buds that are over 180 days old, because those are going to lose their freshness the fastest, and they're going to lose their value in the market. We actually had a customer who was looking at this report, and they were looking at the infused edibles, and they saw that they had a small sliver there that was on the sales floor. And when they looked into it, they had a package of edibles that was on the sales floor at their dispensary that was 360 days old. So they were going to have to destroy it in 5 days due to expiration. So they found the package tag through Aperture. They got on the phone with the dispensary manager and said, hey, here's the package tag. Here's where it says it is. Find these and put these on sale right away. And when they found it had fallen behind a sales display, they put it on sale, sold it within 2 hours, turned what was going to be a total product loss into an actual profit just by using Aperture. So Aperture does a lot of other things with your metric data. We show you your failed tests. We can show you your average THC over time, lifetime production by strain, by flower room, by license, whatever you might want to do, and a whole lot of others. And so want you today, go to aperture.io, sign up for a free trial. If you use our promo code webinar, you'll get 2 free weeks to try out your new in-house data analyst. So thank you for your time. I'll pass it back to Eldon, and happy reporting.
Okay. We'll open it up if there are any questions from the attendees. We've got just a few minutes left. If you have any questions that you'd like the panel to answer or anything, just type those into the Q&A, and we'll answer as many as we can here in the next few minutes. I have a question. Why do I need this software when there's a reporting function already in METRC? Colin, I think is maybe the most anxious to answer that
I'm
one.
just gonna start really quick. We're running out of time, but like, I mean, honestly, with all due respect to METRC, and they know my thoughts on this, their reports are not nearly as efficient as what Aperture provides. And even though there is a reporting function within METRC, Aperture doesn't require double entry, and it doesn't allow, or it doesn't, you're not required to, take a look at the reports from METRC and be able to figure out the unique language that METRC reports are written in, essentially, to be able to get this data. I never found, during the 8 years that in my previous job, I never found that those reports were nearly as helpful as what this information is given by Aperture. And I think one of the things that, if I could go back and put my compliance director hat on, it would be utilizing that information better to forecast and fix unidentified problems. And one of the things that really sticks out that Ian had just said too is, like, we didn't have a data analyst at all. Like, I never heard them even talk about that as a potential position. And so I think one of the things that I really liked about it is the fact that you can have an in-house data analyst ready to go. You don't need to have a data analytic degree or certificate or whatever to be able to understand, what Ian just showed is like, look, this one room is not yielding the same. Go in there, identify what's different about that room and fix that problem. Along with the fact that, again, respect to METRC, it's helped legitimize the industry. There's a place for it. However, their reporting feature is inadequate. But when you speak to them about that, respectfully, they say that it's working. And they can't give you what this does and present it to you in a way that even, an hourly employee could look at and say, cool, this is a problem, let's fix it. Feel better saying that. We're good now.
Okay, yeah, I think, the other big thing is, METRC having all of the reporting that is in METRC is all separated by license. So if you really want to see, even the same report, but with every license combined, you have to build that yourself. You have to pull that data out license by license and then consolidate that. That's very, very time consuming. Okay, we just have a couple minutes left. Ian, I'll throw this question at you. The question is, can anyone else see my data, or how is the data secured inside Aperture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So only your organization and people that you invite within your organization can see your data. So when you originally create your account, you are the administrator, and then you are you control who is invited. We do not even get a default account created on your account or anything like that. So Aperture employees yourself can't see your data. It's all encrypted. So your data is protected, and you have complete control over who you wish to create account for, or who can access it.
Okay. All right, with that, we are out of time. Cass and Colin, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for everyone who's attended. We'll follow up. Make sure you have the link that you need and the promo for the 2-week trial versus, instead of just the 1 week. We'll make sure that you have that. You can always go to aperture.io to take a look at any other information. But thank you, everyone, for joining today, and have a happy holidays. I think we're getting very close to the end of the productive period of the year. So thanks, everyone, and really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon.